Welcome to Sleepless History, where we explore the past in the most peaceful way possible. Tonight's journey takes us through 6 centuries of history, following the rise and fall of one of the world's most enduring empires. Get comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and let the story of the Ottoman Empire gently carry you through the night. The Ottoman Empire. 600 years of history stretching across 3 continents, from a small Anatolian principality to a vast empire that shaped the modern world. This is a story of sultans and soldiers, of conquest and culture, of innovation and tradition. But tonight, we tell it slowly, methodically, allowing each detail to wash over you like waves on a distant shore. Part 1. Origins and Early Foundations. Our story begins not with grand palaces or mighty armies, but with a small group of nomadic warriors in the hills of northwestern Anatolia. The year is approximately 1279. The Mongol invasions have shattered the old order. The Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, once powerful, is fragmenting into smaller principalities called beyliks. In this world of uncertainty and opportunity, a man named Osman will plant the seeds of an empire. Osman, son of Ertugrul, was born around 1258. His father led a small band of Turkish warriors, perhaps 400 horsemen, who had been granted land by the Seljuk Sultan near the Byzantine frontier. This was border country where Christian and Muslim worlds met, clashed, and sometimes cooperated. The town of Sogut, nestled in green hills, became young Osman's home. Imagine the landscape. Rolling hills covered in oak and pine, mountain streams cutting through valleys, small villages of wooden houses, in the distance, the crumbling walls of Byzantine fortresses. This was a land in transition, where the old Byzantine Empire was slowly retreating and Turkish beyliks were gradually expanding. Into this world, Osman grew from boy to man, learning the ways of the warrior and the leader. Osman's father, Ertugrul, appears in historical records as a minor chieftain, though later Ottoman chronicles would embellish his story significantly. What we know with more certainty is that when Ertugrul died, sometime around 1281 or 1282, Osman inherited leadership of their small community. He was perhaps 23 or 24 years old. He commanded a few hundred warriors. His domain consisted of a handful of villages. The Byzantine city of Bursa lay to the west, still unconquered. The future empire existed only in potential. The early years of Osman's rule were spent in what the Turks called Gaza, frontier warfare against the Byzantines. This was not total war, but rather a constant state of raiding, skirmishing, and opportunistic expansion. Osman proved to be a skilled leader. He was patient, diplomatic, and strategic. He formed alliances with neighbouring Turkish chieftains. He welcomed warriors from other beyliks who sought glory and plunder on the frontier. Slowly, his following grew. By 1300, Osman had established his independence from the weakening Seljuk Sultanate. He began minting his own coins, a significant symbol of sovereignty. His reputation spread. Warriors came from across Anatolia to join his banner. Byzantine defectors, attracted by opportunity or survival, also joined his ranks. Osman's polity was becoming multi-ethnic, incorporating Turks, Greeks, and others into a new frontier society. The year 1302 brought a pivotal moment. Osman's forces defeated a Byzantine army near the fortress of Baphius. also called Koyun Hisar. This was not a large battle by later standards, perhaps a few thousand men in total, but it was symbolically important. It announced that Osman's Beylik was now a force to be reckoned with. Byzantine control over the Anatolian countryside began to crumble more rapidly. Greek peasants and townspeople had to make difficult choices about their loyalties and futures. Osman himself remains somewhat mysterious to us. No contemporary portrait survives. Later chronicles describe him as tall and strong, with a thick beard and penetrating eyes, but these descriptions follow literary conventions rather than historical memory. What seems clear is that he possessed the qualities necessary for leadership in that turbulent age: courage, cunning, and the ability to inspire loyalty. He was generous to his followers, ruthless to his enemies, and pragmatic in his governance. As Osman aged, he continued his slow, methodical expansion. Each valley conquered, each fortress taken, added to his domain and his prestige. He laid siege to important Byzantine cities like Bursa and Nicaea. Though he would not live to see them fall, he established the basic administrative structures that his successors would build upon. He created a system where conquered lands were granted to warriors in return for military service. He showed tolerance toward his Christian subjects, allowing them to keep their religion and much of their property in exchange for taxes and loyalty. The name Ottoman comes from Osman, his name rendered as Othman or Uthman in Arabic. His descendants would call themselves Osmanli, the House of Osman. Europeans would call them Ottomans. But in those early years, they were simply one beylik among many, distinguished mainly by their location on the productive frontier with Byzantium and by their leaders' steady accumulation of success. Osman died in either 1323 or 1324. Some accounts say he died in the town of Sogut, others say near Bursa during the ongoing siege. He was approximately 65 or 66 years old. He had ruled for over 40 years. At his death, his beylik controlled a territory perhaps 100 miles across, with a population of tens of thousands. It was a small realm by the standards of great empires, but it was well organized, militarily effective, and positioned for further growth. Part 2. Orhan and the First Expansion. Osman's son Orhan succeeded him smoothly, which was itself notable. In the turbulent world of medieval Anatolia, succession often meant civil war. But Orhan was the clear heir, probably already in his 40s when his father died, experienced and respected. He would rule for nearly 40 years and transform his father's frontier beylik into a genuine regional power. Orhan's first priority was to complete the sieges his father had begun. In 1326, after a siege lasting perhaps a decade, the city of Bursa finally fell to Ottoman forces. This was a tremendous achievement. Bursa was a real city with perhaps 50,000 inhabitants, stone walls, churches, and bazaars. It had been a Byzantine possession for centuries. Now it was Ottoman. Orhan made it his capital, and Bursa would remain an important Ottoman city for the rest of the empire's existence. The capture of Bursa gave the Ottomans something they had previously lacked: an urban base, a centre of administration and commerce. Orhan established a mint there, reformed the coinage, and began constructing the first distinctively Ottoman buildings: a great mosque, a medrese for religious education, and an imaret, a public kitchen that fed the poor. These institutions announced that the Ottomans were not merely raiders but builders of civilization. In 1331, the city of Nicaea fell, followed by Nicomedia in 1337. Each conquest brought more territory, more subjects, more revenue, and more prestige. The Ottomans now controlled the entire southeastern shore of the Sea of Marmara. Byzantine Constantinople could look across the water and see Ottoman territory. The psychological impact was significant. The Byzantine Empire, once spanning the Mediterranean, was now reduced to Constantinople itself, a few coastal cities, and scattered territories in Greece and the Balkans. But Orhan was more than a conqueror. He was an organizer and an innovator. He created the first real Ottoman administrative system. He divided his territory into districts called sanjaks, each governed by a military commander. He formalized the Timar system, where soldiers were granted land revenues in exchange for military service. This created a self-sustaining military structure. The land supported the soldiers conquered more land, and the cycle continued. Orhan also began the practice of recruiting Christian boys through the Devshirme system, though this would be more fully developed by later sultans. Young Christian boys, often from the Balkans, would be taken into Ottoman service, converted to Islam, and trained as soldiers or administrators. This created a cadre of slaves loyal only to the Sultan, with no competing family loyalties. It was a controversial practice, yet it would become one of the empire's distinctive features. During Orhan's reign, the Ottomans also made their first significant move into Europe. In 1352, a Byzantine civil war provided the opportunity. The rival Byzantine factions both sought Ottoman military support, offering payment and even territory. Orhan allied with one faction, and his son Suleiman led Ottoman troops across the Dardanelles. They fought for their Byzantine allies, but also began to establish their own foothold on the European shore. In 1354, a devastating earthquake damaged the fortifications of the Gallipoli Peninsula. Ottoman forces quickly occupied the strategic fortress of Gallipoli. This was the Ottomans' first permanent European possession. It would serve as a bridgehead for future expansion. Byzantine attempts to dislodge the Ottomans failed. The empire was now transcontinental, with territories in both Asia and Europe. Orhan married twice, and both marriages had political significance. His first wife was the daughter of a powerful Turkish chieftain, cementing an important alliance. His second wife, Theodora, was a Byzantine princess, daughter of the emperor John VI Cantacuzene. This marriage symbolized the complex relationship between Ottomans and Byzantines, sometimes enemies, sometimes allies, increasingly intertwined as the Ottoman star rose and the Byzantine sun set. Under Orhan, Ottoman military organization began to take its distinctive form. The infantry was organized into units with clear chains of command. Cavalry remained the elite force, with heavily armoured horsemen forming the core of the army. But Orhan also recognized the importance of infantry, particularly for siege warfare. He began to develop corps of specialized soldiers, archers, engineers, and the first rudimentary units of what would become the famous Janissaries. The Ottoman economy under Orhan was primarily agricultural, based on the taxes collected from peasant farmers. But the capture of cities like Bursa and Nicaea added commercial revenues. These cities sat on important trade routes connecting Anatolia with Constantinople and the Black Sea. Merchants, both Muslim and Christian, paid customs duties to the Ottoman state. This commercial revenue allowed Orhan to pay for professional soldiers and to invest in buildings and infrastructure. Orhan's religious policy set important precedents. While he was a devout Muslim and promoted Islamic institutions, he practiced a pragmatic tolerance toward his Christian subjects. Churches were generally not destroyed or converted to mosques, at least not immediately. Christians continued to practice their religion, though they paid a special tax called the jizya. This policy of limited tolerance would continue throughout much of Ottoman history, with periods of greater and lesser permissiveness. Orhan died in 1362 at the age of perhaps 70 or 71. He had ruled for 38 years. The Beylik he inherited from his father had become a substantial regional state. Ottoman territory now stretched across northwestern Anatolia and included the crucial foothold in Europe at Gallipoli. The population under Ottoman rule had grown to perhaps several 100,000. The foundations of empire had been laid. Part 3. Murad I and the establishment of the Balkan presence. Murad I became Sultan in 1362. He was Orhan's son, probably in his 30s when he came to power. Murad's reign would last for nearly 30 years, and during that time the Ottoman state would transform from a regional Anatolian power into a true empire straddling 2 continents. Murad was a warrior, but also a diplomat and administrator. He understood that building an empire required more than just military conquest. Murad's attention turned primarily toward Europe. The Byzantine Empire was weak, the Balkans were politically fragmented, and opportunities for expansion were abundant. In 1363, soon after becoming Sultan, Murad led his army deeper into Thrace, the European territory just beyond Constantinople. The city of Adrianople, called Edirne in Turkish, fell to Ottoman forces in 1369 after a short siege. This was a major city, the second city of Byzantium after Constantinople itself. Murad made Adrianople his new capital, a symbolic statement that the Ottoman future lay in Europe as much as in Asia. From Adrianople, Murad launched campaigns northward into Bulgaria and Macedonia, westward into Albania and Serbia, and southward into Greece. These campaigns followed a pattern. First came raids to weaken the target region. Then came larger campaigns to defeat enemy armies in the field. Finally came the establishment of Ottoman administration and the integration of the conquered territory into the empire. It was methodical, patient, and highly effective. In 1371, the Ottomans won a significant victory at the Battle of Maritsa River against a combined Serbian and Hungarian force. This battle, though not widely known today, was crucial. It demonstrated that the Ottomans could defeat large Christian coalitions in open battle. Serbian resistance crumbled. The Serbian prince, Marko, became an Ottoman vassal, required to pay tribute and provide troops to the Sultan. Other Balkan rulers quickly concluded that resistance was futile and submission to Ottoman overlordship was the wiser course. Murad developed the concept of vassalage into a sophisticated instrument of control. Conquered Christian rulers were often left in place as Ottoman vassals. They kept their thrones and much of their autonomy in local affairs. In return, they paid annual tribute, provided soldiers for Ottoman campaigns, and conducted their foreign policy according to Ottoman interests. This system allowed the Ottomans to control vast territories without maintaining large garrisons everywhere. It was efficient and, for the conquered, often preferable to outright annexation. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 was the culminating moment of Murad's reign. A large coalition of Serbian, Bosnian, and other Christian forces gathered to resist further Ottoman expansion. Murad led the Ottoman army in person. The battle was fought on the Kosovo field on June 15th, 1389, the feast day of Saint Vitus. The fighting was fierce and the outcome uncertain for much of the day. Both armies were multi-ethnic. The Ottomans had Serbian vassals fighting on their side, while the Christian coalition included some Muslim auxiliaries. The outcome of Kosovo was an Ottoman victory, but it came at a heavy price. Murad himself was killed during or shortly after the battle. According to one account, a Serbian knight named Milos Obilic pretended to defect and was brought before the Sultan, whereupon he stabbed Murad. Other sources give different accounts of the Sultan's death. What is certain is that Murad died at Kosovo, but the Ottoman army won the battle and Serbian resistance was broken. Kosovo became a legendary battle for both sides. For Serbs, a tragic defeat and the loss of independence. For Ottomans, a glorious victory that secured their Balkan Empire. Beyond his military achievements, Murad made crucial contributions to Ottoman state building. He expanded and formalized the Janissary Corps, the elite infantry units composed of converted Christian youths. The Janissaries were slaves of the Sultan, owned no property, could not marry, and devoted their lives to military service. In return, they received regular pay, superior equipment, and high status. They became the most feared infantry in Europe. They were also intensely loyal to the Sultan and the Ottoman state, having no competing loyalties or claims to power. Murad also developed the Ottoman religious and legal establishment. He patronized the construction of mosques, madrasas, and other Islamic institutions. He brought prominent Islamic scholars to his court. He began to create a unified Ottoman Islamic culture that blended Turkish traditions with Persian and Arab Islamic civilization. At the same time, he maintained the pragmatic tolerance toward Christians and Jews that had characterized earlier Ottoman rulers. This combination of Islamic identity and religious tolerance would be a distinctive feature of the empire. The economy continued to grow under Murad. The conquest of Thrace and parts of Bulgaria and Serbia brought rich agricultural lands under Ottoman control. The trade routes connecting Anatolia with the Balkans became more secure and commerce flourished. Cities like Adrianople, Bursa, and the Anatolian cities grew in population and wealth. The Ottoman state collected taxes in the form of agricultural produce, customs duties, and special levies on non-Muslims. These revenues funded the army, the bureaucracy, and the Sultan's building projects. Murad's foreign policy was sophisticated. He played Byzantine factions against each other, supporting first one claimant to the throne and then another, always ensuring that Byzantium remained weak and dependent on Ottoman goodwill. He made alliances with Venice and other Italian maritime republics when it suited him. He maintained generally good relations with the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt and Syria, recognizing that a conflict with that powerful state would be premature. He subdued rival Anatolian beyliks, bringing more of Asia Minor under direct Ottoman control. When Murad died at Kosovo in 1389, he was approximately 60 years old. He had ruled for 27 years. The Ottoman state he left to his son Bayezid controlled a vast territory: northwestern Anatolia, all of Thrace, much of Bulgaria, most of Macedonia, parts of Serbia and Albania, and a complex network of vassals throughout the Balkans. The population under direct Ottoman rule, or Ottoman vassalage, was perhaps 2 or 3 million people. The small frontier beylik, founded by Osman, had become an empire. Part 4: Bayezid the Thunderbolt and the Time of Crisis. Bayezid the First succeeded his father on the battlefield of Kosovo. Legend says that Bayezid's brother Yakub also survived the battle, and that Bayezid immediately ordered him executed to prevent civil war. Whether this story is true or not, Bayezid began his reign as sole sultan and quickly earned the nickname Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for the speed and ferocity of his military campaigns. Bayezid was perhaps 29 years old when he became sultan in 1389. He was energetic, ambitious, and aggressive. He lacked his father's patience, but possessed tremendous military skill and an unshakable confidence in Ottoman destiny. His reign would see spectacular victories, followed by catastrophic defeat, and would nearly destroy the empire his great-grandfather had founded. In the early years of his reign, Bayezid continued the Balkan conquests. He campaigned in Bosnia, forcing its king into vassalage. He annexed more of Serbia and Bulgaria. He pushed into Albania and clashed with the Venetians. In 1396, a large crusade army assembled to stop Ottoman expansion. The Hungarian king led a coalition of French, German, and Hungarian knights. The two armies met at Nicopolis on September 25th, 1396. The Battle of Nicopolis was a decisive Ottoman victory. The Christian crusaders attacked rashly, their heavily armoured knights charging the Ottoman positions without proper reconnaissance or coordination. The Ottomans let them advance, then encircled them with cavalry. Thousands of crusaders were killed or captured. The flower of French chivalry was destroyed. King Sigismund of Hungary barely escaped by boat. Bayezid had hundreds of prisoners executed in retaliation for earlier Christian atrocities. The battle was the last major crusade of the Middle Ages and secured Ottoman control over the Balkans for the next century. Flushed with success, Bayezid turned his attention to Constantinople. The Byzantine capital was now surrounded by Ottoman territory, a Christian island in an Ottoman sea. Its population had declined to perhaps 50,000, a fraction of its former size. Its walls were crumbling in places. Bayezid laid siege in 1394 and again in 1398. But Constantinople's walls, even in decay, were formidable. The Byzantine navy controlled the sea approaches, and European powers, recognizing the strategic importance of Constantinople, sent supplies and reinforcements. Bayezid could not take the city, at least not yet. In Anatolia, Bayezid pursued an aggressive policy of annexation. His father and grandfather had generally been content to accept the submission of other Turkish beyliks as vassals. Bayezid wanted direct control. Between 1390 and 1402, he conquered or annexed most of the remaining independent Anatolian beyliks. These included substantial states like Karaman, Jermian, and the territories along the Black Sea coast. By 1400, the Ottomans controlled almost all of Anatolia. But this aggression created enemies. The rulers of the conquered Beyliks resented their loss of independence. They looked for opportunities to regain their autonomy. And beyond Anatolia, a new and terrible threat was emerging. Timur, also known as Tamerlane, had built an empire stretching from Delhi to Damascus. He was a Turco-Mongol conqueror of extraordinary military genius and ruthlessness. He had defeated the Golden Horde, conquered Persia, sacked Delhi, and was now turning his attention toward Anatolia. Timur and Bayezid exchanged hostile letters. Bayezid refused to defer to Timur or to restore the independence of the Anatolian Beyliks. The dispossessed Turkish princes fled to Timur's court and urged him to invade Anatolia. In 1402, Timur led a vast army into eastern Anatolia. Bayezid marched to meet him. The two armies converged near Ankara. The Battle of Ankara was fought on July 20th, 1402. Timur had perhaps 100,000 men, perhaps more. Bayezid had perhaps 80,000, though estimates vary widely. Timur's army included not just his veteran Mongol cavalry, but also contingents from all his subject peoples. Bayezid's army included Ottoman regulars, Janissaries, and contingents from his vassals and subjects. The battle lasted a day and ended in complete Ottoman defeat. Bayezid's army was outmaneuvered, outfought, and ultimately shattered. Many of his Anatolian troops, recently conquered and of dubious loyalty, defected to Timur during the battle. The Janissaries fought bravely but were overwhelmed. Bayezid himself was captured. The proud Sultan, the Thunderbolt, was now Timur's prisoner. Timur treated him with respect initially, but kept him in captivity. Bayezid died in captivity in March 1403, possibly by suicide. The Ottoman Sultan, who had seemed invincible, was gone. The Battle of Ankara nearly destroyed the Ottoman Empire. Timur restored the independence of the Anatolian Beyliks, undoing decades of Ottoman expansion. He raided western Anatolia and extracted tributes from Ottoman cities. The Balkan vassals saw an opportunity and rebelled or reasserted independence. The Byzantine emperor hoped that the Ottoman threat was finished. And within the Ottoman royal family, civil war erupted. Bayezid had 4 surviving sons: Suleiman, Isa, Mehmed, and Musa. Each claimed the throne. The Ottoman interregnum, as this period is called, lasted from 1402 to 1413. It was a time of chaos, civil war, and near collapse. Suleiman controlled the European territories initially and ruled from Adrianople. Mehmed held parts of Anatolia. Isa held other Anatolian territories but was defeated and killed by Mehmed in 1405. Musa eventually entered the contest as well. The civil war was brutal. Brothers fought brothers. Cities changed hands. Vassals played the rivals against each other. The Byzantine Empire, reprieved from the Ottoman threat, tried to extract concessions from all the claimants. Venice and other Italian states saw opportunities for commercial advantage. The Anatolian Beyliks, restored to independence by Timur, enjoyed their freedom. The Ottoman experiment seemed to be ending in fragmentation, just as the Seljuk state had fragmented before it. But one son proved more capable than the others. Mehmed, the youngest of the 4 brothers, gradually prevailed. He was calculating, ruthless, and patient. He defeated his brother Isa. He made a temporary peace with Suleiman, then defeated him in 1411. He then faced Musa, who had taken control of the European territories. The final battle of the interregnum was fought near Adrianople in 1413. Mehmed's forces won and Musa was killed. After 11 years of civil war, the Ottoman Empire had a single sultan again. Part 5. Mehmed I and the Restoration. Mehmed I became sole sultan in 1413 at the age of about 28. His reign would last for 8 years, a relatively short time, but it was crucial for the empire's survival. Mehmed faced the enormous task of rebuilding and consolidating. The empire had been shattered by defeat and civil war. He needed to restore central authority, recover lost territories, and rebuild the army and administration. Mehmed's first priority was to secure his position domestically. There were still Ottoman princes who might challenge him. There were also religious rebels, the most dangerous being Sheikh Bedreddin, who preached a form of mystical Islam mixed with social egalitarianism. Bedreddin's followers rebelled in 1416, and the revolt spread through western Anatolia and into the European territories. Mehmed suppressed the revolt with difficulty, and Bedreddin was captured and executed. The episode showed the fragility of Ottoman authority after the interregnum. Mehmed also had to deal with the Anatolian beyliks that Timur had restored to independence. He could not immediately reconquer them all. He lacked the military strength. Instead, he used diplomacy and selective force. He made alliances with some beyliks against others. He intervened in succession disputes. Gradually, he reasserted Ottoman influence in Anatolia, though direct control would have to wait for his successors. In the Balkans, Mehmed worked to restore the system of vassalage that had existed before Ankara. Some vassals had rebelled during the interregnum, others had simply asserted more independence. Mehmed campaigned in Wallachia, Serbia, and Albania, reminding local rulers of Ottoman power and restoring tribute relationships. He was generally successful, though he faced determined resistance in some areas, particularly Albania, where the local nobility proved resilient. Mehmed's foreign policy was cautious. He maintained peace with the Byzantine Empire, which was still recovering from its own internal problems. He avoided conflict with Hungary. He kept good relations with Venice and the other Italian maritime states. He focused on internal consolidation rather than external expansion. This restraint was wise given the empire's weakened condition, but it also frustrated some of the more aggressive elements in the Ottoman military establishment. The most serious challenge to Mehmed came in 1416 from an unexpected quarter. A man claiming to be Mustafa, one of Bayezid's sons supposedly killed after Ankara, appeared in Byzantine territory. This false Mustafa, as he came to be called, had Byzantine support. He crossed into Ottoman territory and gathered followers. For a time, it seemed he might succeed in starting another civil war. But Mehmed moved quickly, defeated Mustafa's forces, and captured the pretender. Mustafa was executed, and the Byzantine emperor was forced to acknowledge that supporting Ottoman pretenders was counterproductive. Mehmed I was known as the Gentleman for his relatively mild and cultivated personality. He was a patron of arts and learning. He commissioned buildings, including several fine mosques in Bursa and Adrianople. He encouraged poets and scholars. He tried to project an image of cultured sovereignty, in contrast to the raw military power that his father had embodied. This was partly personal temperament and partly political strategy. He was rebuilding the prestige and legitimacy of the Sultanate after the disasters of the previous decade. Under Mehmed, the Ottoman administrative system was rebuilt and refined. The provincial organization was restored. Tax collection became more regular. The Timar system was reinvigorated, with lands granted to cavalry soldiers in return for military service. The Janissary corps was reorganized and expanded. The religious and legal establishment was patronized and given greater prominence in governance. All of these measures strengthened the central government and created a more stable foundation for future expansion. Mehmed died in 1421 at the age of approximately 36. Some sources suggest he died of illness, possibly a stroke. His reign had been relatively peaceful and focused on restoration rather than conquest. But he had achieved his essential goal. The Ottoman Empire survived. It was not as large as it had been under Bayezid before Ankara, but it was stable, unified, and prepared to resume expansion under his son. Part 6. Murad II and the renewed expansion. Murad II became Sultan in 1421 at the age of about 17. His long reign, lasting nearly 30 years with one brief interruption, would see the Ottoman Empire fully recover from the Ankara disaster and resume its expansion in both Europe and Asia. Murad was a skilled military commander, a shrewd diplomat, and an effective administrator. He also had a mystical, contemplative side, and at one point tried to abdicate in favour of his young son, only to be drawn back into power by necessity. The early years of Murad's reign were dominated by warfare. In 1422, a Byzantine-backed pretender named Mustafa, another false prince claiming to be Bayezid's son, rebelled. Murad besieged and captured the pretender's stronghold and executed him. This removed one threat, but others remained. In 1423, Murad faced a coalition of enemies. The Byzantine Empire, Venice, Hungary, Serbia, and several Anatolian beyliks all opposed him. It was a dangerous moment, but Murad proved equal to the challenge. Murad defeated the coalition piecemeal. He made peace with Venice, neutralizing their naval threat. He campaigned in Anatolia and reasserted Ottoman control over the beyliks that had rebelled. He raided into Hungary and Serbia, reminding them of Ottoman power. By 1425, the immediate threats were contained, and Murad could turn to longer-term objectives. In 1430, after a long siege, Ottoman forces captured Thessalonica, the second city of the Byzantine Empire. This was a major achievement. Thessalonica had been a Byzantine possession for over 1,000 years. Its loss was a psychological blow to Byzantium and a propaganda victory for the Ottomans. The city was thoroughly integrated into the Ottoman system. Its harbour became an important Ottoman port, and a significant Turkish population settled there. Murad's attention then turned to the Balkans. Serbia, under its ruler George Branković, resisted Ottoman overlordship. Murad launched repeated campaigns. In 1441, Ottoman forces captured the important Serbian fortress of Smederevo after a siege. This forced Branković to submit and accept vassal status. Much of Serbia became an Ottoman province, while a rump Serbian state survived as an Ottoman vassal. This pattern of gradual annexation and vassalage was typical of Ottoman Balkan policy. In 1443, Murad attempted something unusual for an Ottoman sultan. He abdicated. He was tired of warfare and politics and wanted to retire to a contemplative life. He left the throne to his 12-year-old son Mehmed and withdrew to Manisa in Anatolia. But the empire was not ready for a child sultan. A rebellion erupted among the Janissaries. The Byzantine and other enemies saw opportunity. The Grand Vizier and other officials begged Murad to return. Reluctantly, he came back in 1446 and resumed the Sultanate. The 1440s saw a renewed threat from Christian Europe. The Hungarian general John Hunyadi had won several victories against Ottoman forces and became the champion of Christian resistance. Pope Eugene IV called for a crusade. In 1444, a crusade army led by King Vladislav III of Poland and Hungary marched into Ottoman territory. They were met by Ottoman forces at Varna on the Black Sea coast on November 10th, 1444. The Battle of Varna was one of the decisive battles of the 15th century. The Crusader army numbered perhaps 20,000 men, the Ottoman army perhaps 50,000. The battle was hard fought. King Vladislav personally led a cavalry charge deep into Ottoman lines, attempting to reach and kill Murad. He almost succeeded, but was surrounded and killed. With their king dead, the Crusader army broke and fled. Hungarian losses were heavy. Hunyadi escaped, but the crusade was finished. Varna secured Ottoman control over the Balkans for the next generation. It also showed that coordinated European resistance to Ottoman expansion was difficult to organize and sustain. The various Christian kingdoms had competing interests and could not maintain unity. The Ottomans, by contrast, had a unified command structure and could concentrate their forces effectively. In 1448, Hunyadi tried again. He led another army, this time into Serbia. Murad met him at Kosovo, the same field where the first Murad had died in 1389. The Second Battle of Kosovo, fought on October 17th, 1448, was another Ottoman victory. Hunyadi's army was defeated, though Hunyadi himself again escaped. After Kosovo, major Christian resistance in the Balkans effectively ended for a generation. In Anatolia, Murad completed the process of annexing the independent beyliks. The beylik of Jermian was fully incorporated. The beylik of Karaman, the largest and most resistant, was reduced in size and forced into subordination. By the end of Murad's reign, virtually all of Anatolia was under direct Ottoman control or firmly subordinated. This Anatolian consolidation was as important as the Balkan conquests because it gave the empire a secure base and ended the chronic problem of rival Turkish states on the Ottoman rear. Murad was also a patron of culture. He commissioned buildings, including the famous Muradiye complex in Bursa with its mosque, medres and tombs. He supported Sufi mystics and gave patronage to dervish orders. He wrote poetry in Turkish, though none of great distinction. He created an atmosphere at court that valued learning and culture alongside military prowess. This helped make the Ottoman Empire not just a military power, but a civilization. Murad II died in February 1451 at the age of about 47. He had ruled for 3 decades, minus the brief interlude in 1443 through 1446 when he had tried to abdicate. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire had fully recovered from the Ankara disaster and had expanded to include most of the Balkans and all of Anatolia. The population of the empire was now perhaps 5 or 6 million people. The treasury was full. The army was powerful and well organized. And Murad's son, Mehmed, was waiting to take the throne and to achieve what no Ottoman sultan had yet achieved: the conquest of Constantinople. Part 7. Mehmed II and the Conquest of Constantinople. Mehmed II became sultan for the second time in 1451 at the age of 19. He had briefly ruled as a boy during his father's attempted abdication, but now he returned as a young man determined to prove himself. History would call him Mehmed the Conqueror, but first he had to earn that title. And there was one prize above all others that he desired: Constantinople, the ancient capital of the Roman Empire, the greatest city of Christendom, the city that had resisted all conquerors for over 1,000 years. Constantinople in 1453 was a shadow of its former glory. Its population had declined to perhaps 50,000, maybe less. Large parts of the city within the walls were abandoned, given over to gardens and ruins. But the walls themselves were still formidable. The triple walls on the land side, built by the Emperor Theodosius in the 5th century, were among the strongest fortifications ever constructed. The city had resisted sieges by Persians, Arabs, Rus, and previous Ottoman sultans. Many believed it was divinely protected and could never fall. Mehmed spent 2 years preparing for the siege. He assembled a massive army. Estimates range from 80,000 to possibly 150,000 men. He gathered a fleet of over 100 ships. Most importantly, he commissioned the construction of enormous cannons, the largest ever built at that time. The master cannon, cast by a Hungarian engineer named Urban, was 27 feet long and could fire stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds. These superguns were designed specifically to batter down Constantinople's walls. In April 1453, the Ottoman army arrived before Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor, Constantine XI, had perhaps 7,000 defenders, including some Genoese and Venetian volunteers. The Byzantine navy was tiny. The city's only hope was that the siege would fail as previous sieges had, or that relief would come from Christian Europe. But no relief was coming. Europe was divided and distracted. Constantinople stood alone. The siege began on April 6th, 1453. Ottoman cannons began bombarding the walls. The great guns fired repeatedly, day after day. The stone walls, which had stood for 1,000 years, began to crack and crumble. Defenders worked frantically each night to repair the breaches using rubble, timber, and barrels filled with earth. But the damage was cumulative. The walls were slowly being destroyed. Mehmed also tried to blockade the city by sea. But on April 20th, 3 Genoese ships bringing supplies managed to break through the Ottoman fleet and reach the city. Mehmed was furious. He decided on a dramatic solution to the problem of the harbour. The Golden Horn, Constantinople's harbour, was protected by a massive chain across its mouth. Ottoman ships could not enter. But Mehmed had his engineers construct a road of greased logs over the hill behind Galata. In a single night, 70 Ottoman ships were hauled overland and launched into the Golden Horn behind the chain. The Byzantines were astonished. Now they had to defend the harbour walls as well as the land walls. The siege continued through April and into May. Defenders and besiegers fought constantly. Mining and countermining went on beneath the walls. Ottoman forces launched several assaults, but were repulsed with heavy losses. The Janissaries, the elite troops, had not yet been committed. Mehmed was patient, waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, his cannons continued their relentless bombardment. By late May, sections of the land wall had been battered down. Mehmed decided the time had come for a final assault. The night of May 28th, he gave his army their instructions. The next morning, May 29th, 1453, the Ottomans would attack with everything they had. All night, the defenders could hear the Ottoman army preparing, drums beating, prayers being chanted, soldiers readying their weapons. The final assault began before dawn on May 29th. First came waves of irregular troops, poorly armed but numerous. They attacked the breached sections of wall. The defenders fought desperately, cutting down attackers by the hundreds. Then came the Anatolian regular troops, better armed and disciplined. They too were repulsed, but they exhausted the defenders. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, came the Janissaries, fresh and eager, the best soldiers in the Ottoman army. The Janissaries attacked the Romanus Gate and a nearby breach in the wall. The fighting was fierce. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine himself was fighting at this section of wall. Then, disaster for the defenders. A small gate called the Kirko Porta, which had been used for counterattacks, was found to be unlocked or forced open. Ottoman troops poured through. Simultaneously, the Janissaries broke through at the main breach. Defenders began to flee. Constantine XI, last emperor of Byzantium, died fighting, his body never to be identified with certainty. Ottoman forces spread through the city. There was looting and killing, as was customary after a city was taken by storm. But Mehmed had given orders to preserve the city's infrastructure and monuments. By afternoon, he entered Constantinople and went to the great church of Hagia Sophia. He ordered it to be converted into a mosque. He prayed there, claiming the city for Islam and for the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople, which Turks would call Istanbul, was now the Ottoman capital. The conquest of Constantinople was a world historical event. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, which traced its lineage back to the Roman Empire, founded over 1500 years earlier. It made the Ottoman Empire the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans. It shocked Christian Europe and led to calls for crusades, though none would materialize effectively. And it established Mehmed as one of the great conquerors of history. But Mehmed was not finished. Over the next quarter century, he would expand the empire even further. In 1459 through 1460, he conquered the remnants of the Serbian state, making Serbia an Ottoman province. In 1463, he conquered Bosnia, ending another independent Balkan Christian kingdom. He campaigned in Albania against the legendary resistance leader Skanderbeg, though Albania would not be fully subdued until after Skanderbeg's death in 1468. Mehmed also turned his attention to Anatolia. The Beylik of Karaman, which had long resisted Ottoman domination, was finally annexed in 1468. The Empire of Trebizond, the last Byzantine successor state, fell to Ottoman arms in 1461. This gave the Ottomans control of the Black Sea coast of Anatolia. In 1475, Mehmed attacked the Crimean Khanate and established Ottoman suzerainty over it, giving the Ottomans influence in the Black Sea region. In 1479 to 1480, Mehmed launched a campaign into southern Albania and Greece, conquering territories that had remained under local Christian control. In 1480, he launched a daring attack on Italy itself, capturing the city of Otranto. This terrified Western Europe. If the Ottomans could establish themselves in Italy, the heartland of Christendom was threatened. But Mehmed died the following year, and the Ottomans evacuated Otranto. Italy was saved, but the episode showed the extent of Ottoman ambitions. Mehmed the Conqueror was not merely a warrior, he was a sophisticated ruler who patronized learning and the arts. He brought Greek, Italian, and Islamic scholars to his court. He had his portrait painted by Italian artists, unusual for a Muslim ruler. He created a new law code, the Canon Name, which organized and systematized Ottoman law. He established Istanbul as a cosmopolitan capital, encouraging Greeks, Jews, Armenians, and others to settle there alongside Turks. He founded the Topkapi Palace, which would be the Ottoman center of government for 4 centuries. Mehmed died on May 3rd, 1481, at the age of 49. Some sources suggest he was poisoned, others that he died of illness, possibly gout. He had ruled for 30 years. Under his leadership, the Ottoman Empire had become one of the great powers of the world. It controlled the straits between Europe and Asia. It dominated the Balkans. It controlled most of Anatolia. Its population was perhaps 8 or 10 million, and it would continue to expand under his successors. Part 8. Bayezid II and the Consolidation. Bayezid II became Sultan in 1481 after a brief succession struggle with his brother Sem. Sem fled into exile and spent years wandering Christian Europe, a potential threat to Bayezid's rule, but never able to mount a serious challenge. Bayezid's reign, lasting 31 years, was a time of consolidation and internal development rather than dramatic conquest. This earned him the nickname the Just, or sometimes the Saint, for his piety and relatively peaceful rule. Bayezid's first years as Sultan were overshadowed by the threat posed by his brother Sem. Various European powers, including the Pope and the French king, hosted Sem and threatened to support his claim to the throne. Bayezid paid them subsidies to keep Sem in comfortable captivity rather than supporting a rebellion. This situation lasted until Sem died in 1495, possibly poisoned. With his brother dead, Bayezid's position became more secure. Bayezid fought 2 wars with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, the first major Ottoman-Mamluk conflicts. The Mamluks controlled Egypt, Syria, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. They were the other great Sunni Muslim power in the Middle East. The wars, fought in 1485 through 1491 and 1498 through 1499, were essentially border conflicts in southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria. Neither side achieved decisive victory, and the wars ended in stalemate. But they established a pattern of Ottoman-Mamluk rivalry that would continue until the Ottomans conquered the Mamluk Sultanate in the next century. In Europe, Bayezid fought wars with Venice, Hungary, and Poland. These were mostly border conflicts rather than wars of major conquest. The long war with Venice, lasting from 1499 to 1503, was fought over control of ports and islands in Greece and the Aegean. The Ottomans captured several Venetian-held fortresses, including important ports like Lepanto and Modon. This established Ottoman naval dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. Bayezid's most significant territorial gain came in 1500 when he annexed most of what is now Montenegro. This eliminated another pocket of Christian resistance in the Balkans and gave the Ottomans more secure borders. But overall, Bayezid's reign saw relatively little territorial expansion compared to his predecessors or his successors. This was partly by choice. Bayezid was more interested in internal governance than constant warfare, and partly by circumstance, as the empire needed time to digest its previous conquests. Internally, Bayezid's reign was significant for several developments. First, the empire's economy continued to grow. Trade flourished. Ottoman control of the Straits and much of the eastern Mediterranean coast gave them control over important trade routes. However, the Portuguese discovery of a sea route to India around Africa, achieved by Vasco da Gama in 1498, would eventually reduce the importance of the overland trade routes through Ottoman territory, though this impact would not be fully felt for some decades. Second, Bayezid was a great patron of architecture. He commissioned numerous buildings, including the beautiful Bayezid Mosque in Istanbul, considered one of the finest examples of early Ottoman classical architecture. He also supported the construction of mosques, medreses, hospitals, and public kitchens throughout the empire. This building program was not just about piety, it was also about legitimacy, showing that Ottoman rule brought prosperity and civilization. Third, Bayezid presided over an influx of Jewish refugees. In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain expelled all Jews from Spain. Tens of thousands fled. Bayezid welcomed them into the Ottoman Empire, recognizing that they would bring valuable skills in commerce, medicine, and crafts. Significant Jewish communities were established in Istanbul, Thessaloniki, and other Ottoman cities. This policy of tolerance toward religious minorities was pragmatic. Non-Muslims paid special taxes and provided useful services, but it also reflected a genuine Ottoman tradition of relative religious pluralism. Fourth, Bayezid's reign saw the codification of Ottoman administrative practices. The system of provincial government was formalized. The Timar system of military land grants was refined. The role of the Grand Vizier and the Imperial Council was clarified. Tax collection became more systematic. All of this made the empire more efficient and more stable. The Ottoman state was becoming increasingly bureaucratic, moving beyond the personal rule of the Sultan toward an impersonal administrative system. However, Bayezid's later years were troubled. His sons began to maneuver for the succession. Ottoman succession had no fixed rule. Typically, when a sultan died, his sons fought for the throne, and the winner executed his brothers to prevent civil war. This brutal but effective system meant that the strongest son became sultan, but the jockeying for position often began before the old sultan died. Bayezid had several sons, the most important being Ahmed, Korkut, and Selim. Selim, who would later be called Selim the Grim, was the governor of Trabzon on the Black Sea coast. He was younger than his brothers, but more ruthless and more militarily capable. In 1511, Selim rebelled against his father, marching toward Istanbul with an army. Bayezid's position was weak, he was old, possibly ill, and the Janissaries were restless. The Janissaries preferred Selim, seeing him as a strong military leader. Under pressure, Bayezid abdicated in April 1512 in favour of Selim. He died a month later, on May 26, 1512, at the age of approximately 65. Some sources suggest his death was suspiciously sudden, raising the possibility that Selim had him poisoned to ensure a smooth succession. Part 9. Selim I and the Conquest of the East. Selim I became Sultan in 1512 at the age of about 47. His 9-year reign would be among the most consequential in Ottoman history. Where his father had been peaceful and pious, Selim was warlike and ruthless. Where previous sultans had focused on Europe, Selim turned his attention to the east. By the time of his death, he would have doubled the size of the empire and transformed it from a regional Balkan Anatolian power into a world empire controlling the Middle East. Selim's first acts as sultan were brutal but characteristic. He had his brothers Ahmed and Korkut tracked down and executed. He also killed several nephews and their sons. This fratricide was horrific, but served the purpose of eliminating rival claimants and preventing civil war. It was standard Ottoman practice, though Selim pursued it with particular thoroughness. Ottoman subjects were not shocked by this. They expected it. Stability and order took precedence over sentiment. Selim's great enemy was Safavid Persia. The Safavid dynasty had come to power in Persia in 1501 under Shah Ismail. The Safavids were Shiite Muslims, and they sought to convert their subjects to Shiism. This created a major religious divide in the Islamic world. The Ottomans were Sunnis. Selim saw the Safavids as heretics and a threat to Ottoman security. Moreover, the Safavids had been encouraging Shiite movements within Ottoman Anatolia, threatening internal stability. In 1514, Selim ordered a census of Shiites in Ottoman territory. Tens of thousands were identified. Many were deported or killed. This harsh persecution of Shiites was motivated by both religious conviction and security concerns. Selim could not tolerate a fifth column within his empire when he was preparing to war against the Safavids. In 1514, Selim led a massive army eastward. The Ottoman and Persian armies met at Chaldiran in northwestern Iran on August 23, 1514. The Safavids had a large cavalry army, skilled in traditional nomadic warfare, but the Ottomans had superior firepower, Janissaries armed with muskets and powerful artillery. The battle was decisive. Ottoman firearms broke the Persian cavalry charges. Shah Ismail was wounded and barely escaped. His army was routed. Selim captured the Safavid capital of Tabriz, though he did not hold it permanently. The Battle of Chaldiran established Ottoman military superiority over Persia and secured the eastern border of Anatolia. It also showed the importance of gunpowder weapons. The Ottomans, along with the Mughals of India and a few others, were gunpowder empires, states that owed much of their military success to the effective use of cannons and firearms. Traditional cavalry, no matter how brave or skilled, could not stand against disciplined infantry armed with firearms. After Chaldiran, Selim turned his attention southward. The Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and Syria was weak and internally divided. Selim had various grievances against the Mamluks, including their sheltering of one of his nephews and their interference in Anatolian politics. In 1516, Selim led another massive campaign, this time into Syria. The Ottomans and Mamluks met at Marj Dabik, north of Aleppo, on August 24, 1516. Like the Safavids at Chaldiran, the Mamluks relied on cavalry, particularly their famous mounted archers. Like the Safavids, they were shattered by Ottoman firearms. The Mamluk Sultan was killed in the battle. The Mamluk army broke and fled. Syria fell to the Ottomans almost without further resistance. Aleppo, Damascus, and Jerusalem all submitted. The Ottomans now controlled the Levant. Selim pressed on into Egypt itself. The remaining Mamluk forces rallied under a new sultan and prepared to defend Cairo. The final battle was fought at Ridaniah, just outside Cairo, on January 22nd, 1517. Again, Ottoman firepower proved decisive. The Mamluks fought bravely but were outmatched. Cairo fell. The last Mamluk sultan fled but was soon captured and executed. Egypt, one of the richest and most important provinces of the Islamic world, was now Ottoman. The conquest of Egypt and Syria had enormous consequences. First, the Ottomans now controlled the holy cities of Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. This gave them immense prestige in the Islamic world. The Ottoman Sultan could now claim to be the protector of Islam's holiest sites. The Sharif of Mecca, who guarded the Kaaba, recognized Ottoman suzerainty. The title of Caliph, the leader of all Muslims, was transferred from the Abbasid Caliph living under Mamluk protection to the Ottoman Sultan, or so the Ottomans later claimed. This claim was disputed, but it strengthened Ottoman legitimacy. Second, Egypt's enormous wealth now flowed into Ottoman coffers. Egypt was one of the richest agricultural regions in the world, thanks to the Nile's annual floods. It also controlled trade routes from the Red Sea and was a centre of commerce. Egyptian grain fed Istanbul and other Ottoman cities. Egyptian taxes filled the Ottoman treasury. The empire's resources and power increased dramatically. Third, Ottoman territory now stretched continuously from the Danube to the Nile, from Algeria to the borders of Persia. The Mediterranean was becoming an Ottoman lake. European trade routes were threatened. The balance of power in the region shifted decisively in favour of the Ottomans. Selim also gained control of a substantial navy from the Mamluks. Ottoman fleets could now operate not just in the Mediterranean, but also in the Red Sea, threatening Portuguese positions in the Indian Ocean. Ottoman influence extended into Yemen and along the Arabian coast. The empire was becoming a truly global power. Selim died on September 22nd, 1520, at the age of about 55. He was returning from a campaign when he died, possibly of plague or cancer. His reign had lasted only 8 years, but in that time he had doubled the size of the empire. He had been ruthless, paranoid, and often cruel, executing not just his brothers, but also numerous officials who displeased him. But he had also been brilliantly successful. He left to his son Suleiman an empire vaster and richer than any previous Ottoman sultan had ruled. Part 10. Suleiman the Magnificent, the Golden Age, Part 1. Suleiman the First became sultan in 1520 at the age of 25 or 26. His reign would last for 46 years, longer than any other Ottoman sultan. Europeans would call him Suleiman the Magnificent because of his wealth, power, and the splendour of his court. Ottomans called him Suleiman the Lawgiver for his reform of the legal system. His reign is considered the golden age of Ottoman power, when the empire reached its greatest extent and achieved its highest cultural flowering. Suleiman was tall, slender, and serious. He had been carefully educated and prepared for rule. He was intelligent, cultivated, and wrote poetry under the pen name Muhibi. He was also ambitious and determined to surpass his father and grandfather in military glory, and he was fortunate in his timing. He inherited a powerful, wealthy, and well-organized empire just when European powers were divided and distracted. Suleiman's first campaign was against Hungary. In 1521, Ottoman forces captured the important fortress of Belgrade, which guarded the southern approach to Hungary. This removed a major obstacle to Ottoman expansion northward. The next year, 1522, Suleiman's forces captured the island of Rhodes from the Knights of Street. John, who had held it for over 200 years, Rhodes had been a haven for Christian pirates who raided Ottoman shipping. Its capture secured Ottoman control over the eastern Mediterranean. But Suleiman's greatest European triumph came in 1526. Hungary's young king, Louis II, gathered an army to resist Ottoman invasion. The two armies met at Mohacs in southern Hungary on August 29, 1526. The Hungarians numbered perhaps 25,000, the Ottomans perhaps 60,000. The battle was a catastrophe for Hungary. Ottoman artillery and Janissaries shattered the Hungarian army. King Louis was killed, possibly drowned while fleeing across a stream. Hungarian casualties were enormous. The Kingdom of Hungary, which had resisted Ottoman expansion for generations, effectively ceased to exist as an independent state. After Mohacs, much of Hungary fell under Ottoman control. Buda, the capital, was occupied in 1541 and became the centre of an Ottoman province. The western and northern parts of Hungary came under Habsburg control, as did a rump Hungarian kingdom in Transylvania that paid tribute to both Ottomans and Habsburgs. Hungary would remain partitioned and fought over for the next century and a half. In 1529, Suleiman led his army to Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Empire. This was an audacious move. No Muslim army had reached so far into Central Europe since the 8th century. Vienna was besieged from late September to mid-October 1529. The defenders, led by Count Nicholas of Salm, held firm. Autumn rains turned the roads to mud, making it difficult to bring up supplies and siege guns. Disease spread in the Ottoman camp. Suleiman decided to withdraw. Vienna was saved, and Western Europe breathed a sigh of relief. Suleiman would besiege Vienna again in 1532, but again he failed to take the city. Vienna would remain the limit of Ottoman expansion in Central Europe. The Habsburgs would remain the primary European rival to Ottoman power. The Ottoman-Habsburg struggle would dominate Eastern European politics for the next 2 centuries, but Suleiman's attention was not focused only on Europe. In the East, conflict with Safavid Persia continued. Between 1534 and 1536, Suleiman led a major campaign into Persia. He captured Tabriz and Baghdad, though Tabriz would be lost again. The treaty that ended the war left the Ottomans in control of Iraq, including the religiously important cities of Baghdad, Najaf, and Karbala. This expanded Ottoman territory to the Persian Gulf, and gave the empire control over Mesopotamia. On the seas, Ottoman naval power under the command of Hayreddin Barbarossa dominated the Mediterranean. Barbarossa had been a corsair, a pirate, but in 1533 Suleiman appointed him admiral of the Ottoman fleet. Under his command, the Ottoman navy defeated the Habsburgs and their allies repeatedly. In 1538, at the Battle of Preveza, Barbarossa defeated a Christian coalition fleet. Ottoman galleys raided the coasts of Spain and Italy. Even the French, rivals of the Habsburgs, made an alliance with the Ottomans, the first formal alliance between a Christian power and the Ottomans. The Mediterranean had become an Ottoman sea. In North Africa, the Ottomans extended their control. Algiers, Tripoli, and Tunis came under Ottoman suzerainty, though local rulers maintained considerable autonomy. This gave the Ottomans bases along the entire southern Mediterranean coast and allowed them to project power against Spain and Italy. The Barbary corsairs, nominally Ottoman subjects, raided Christian shipping and coasts, taking slaves and treasure. This piracy was both a security problem for Europe and a source of revenue and prestige for the Ottomans. Part 11. Suleiman the Magnificent, the Golden Age, Part 2. But Suleiman's reign was not only about warfare and conquest, it was also about law, administration, and culture. Suleiman earned his Ottoman title of the lawgiver through his comprehensive reform of Ottoman law. He commissioned a new law code that organized and systematized the complex body of Ottoman regulations. This code covered criminal law, land tenure, taxation, and administrative procedures. It was based on Islamic law, but also incorporated customary law and the Sultan's own regulations. It provided a consistent legal framework for the empire's diverse populations. Suleiman also patronized architecture on a grand scale. His chief architect was Mimar Sinan, one of the greatest architects in history. Sinan designed and built hundreds of structures, mosques, bridges, aqueducts, palaces, and public buildings. His masterpieces include the Sulmaniye Mosque in Istanbul, the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, and numerous other buildings throughout the empire. These structures combined mathematical precision, structural innovation, and aesthetic beauty. They announced Ottoman power and sophistication to the world. The Ottoman court under Suleiman was magnificent. Foreign ambassadors were awed by the ceremonies, the wealth on display, and the discipline of the court. The Sultan sat in splendor, surrounded by officials and guards, receiving diplomats and petitioners. The treasury was filled with treasures, gold, jewels, precious fabrics, rare objects from around the world. The palace kitchens fed thousands daily. The Sultan's clothing and furniture were works of art. All of this was deliberate. Power needed to be displayed to be believed. Suleiman's personal life was dominated by his relationship with Hurrem Sultan, known in Europe as Roxolana. She was a slave of probably Ukrainian origin, who became Suleiman's favourite concubine and eventually his legal wife, breaking with Ottoman tradition. She bore him several sons and wielded enormous influence. She was involved in palace politics and influenced appointments and policies. Her rise to power showed the potential for women in the Ottoman system to exercise real influence, though always indirectly through their relationships with powerful men. Hurrem's influence was controversial. She was blamed, probably unfairly, for the execution of Suleiman's eldest son Mustafa in 1553. Mustafa was the son of another woman and was popular with the army. Suleiman came to see him as a threat, possibly influenced by Hurrem and her supporters who wanted to see her own sons succeed to the throne. Mustafa was strangled by mutes in his father's tent during a campaign. This execution shocked the empire. It was seen as unjust and cruel, but it ensured that Hurrem's sons would have clear path to succession. Suleiman's later years saw continued warfare. In the east, wars with Persia continued intermittently. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. The border between the two empires stabilized roughly along the line it occupies today between Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. In the Mediterranean, Ottoman naval power remained strong, though there were setbacks. In 1565, Ottoman forces besieged Malta, held by the Knights of St. John. The siege lasted from May to September, but ultimately failed. The defenders held out until Spanish reinforcements arrived, and the Ottomans withdrew. This was a rare defeat and a propaganda victory for Christendom. In Hungary, warfare continued as well. The Habsburgs never accepted the loss of Hungary and constantly intrigued and fought to regain territory. The Ottoman-Habsburg border became a zone of constant low-intensity conflict, raids, skirmishes, sieges of fortresses. Both sides built elaborate defensive systems. Neither could achieve decisive victory. This prolonged conflict drained resources from both empires. In 1566, at the age of 71 or 72, Suleiman led one last campaign into Hungary. He besieged the fortress of Szigetvar. The siege lasted from August to September. The defenders resisted fiercely. Suleiman died in his tent on September 7th, 1566, possibly from a heart attack. His death was kept secret until the fortress fell and the army could be safely withdrawn. Thus ended the reign of the greatest Ottoman Sultan. Suleiman had ruled for 46 years. Under him, the Ottoman Empire reached its greatest extent. It controlled southeastern Europe from Hungary to the Black Sea. It controlled all of Anatolia. It controlled the Levant, Egypt, North Africa, Iraq, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. Its population was perhaps 15 to 25 million, making it one of the largest empires in the world. Its army was the most powerful in Europe and the Middle East. Its navy dominated the Mediterranean. Its wealth, drawn from agriculture, trade, and conquest, was enormous. But Suleiman's death also marked a turning point. Never again would the empire expand so dramatically. The next century and a half would see the empire reach its maximum extent and then slowly begin to contract. The internal problems that would eventually bring the empire down were already present in Suleiman's time, though obscured by the empire's continued success. The system of training and selecting capable administrators would degrade. The Janissaries would become a conservative political force resistant to reform. Military technology would advance in Europe while stagnating in the Ottoman Empire. But all of this was in the future. In 1566, the Ottoman Empire was at its zenith. Part 12. The long decline begins. Selim II to Murad III. Selim II became Sultan in 1566 at the age of 42. He was Suleiman's third son. His older brothers were already dead. Selim is remembered as the first of the weak sultans, the beginning of the empire's long decline. Where his father had been abstemious and devoted to governance and warfare, Selim enjoyed wine, poetry, and the pleasures of the palace. He left most governing to his Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, a capable administrator who had served Suleiman. Selim's nickname was the Sot, or the Drunkard, reflecting his reputation for drinking wine, which was forbidden by Islamic law. Whether this reputation was entirely fair is debatable, but it is true that Selim was not personally involved in military campaigns as his predecessors had been. He was content to remain in Istanbul and let his generals conduct wars. The major event of Selim's reign was the conquest of Cyprus in 1570 to 1571. Cyprus was held by Venice and was wealthy and strategically located. An Ottoman fleet and army invaded. After a long siege, the fortress of Famagusta fell in August 1571. The Venetian commander was promised safe conduct, but was instead flayed alive by the Ottoman commander, a grotesque war crime that shocked Europe. Cyprus became an Ottoman possession and would remain so for over 3 centuries. But the conquest of Cyprus provoked a response. Pope Pius V organised a Holy League of Spain, Venice, Genoa, and other Italian states to counter the Ottoman threat. A large Christian fleet assembled. The Ottoman fleet, confident after years of dominance, met them at Lepanto in the Gulf of Corinth on October 7th, 1571. The Battle of Lepanto was one of the largest naval battles in history. Perhaps 200 Ottoman galleys faced perhaps 200 Christian galleys. The battle was fought in the old style. Galleys rowed toward each other, exchanged arrows and gunfire, then the crews boarded and fought hand to hand. The battle lasted several hours. Ultimately, the Christian fleet won decisively. Over half the Ottoman ships were sunk or captured. Perhaps 30,000 Ottoman sailors and soldiers died. It was a catastrophic defeat. Lepanto was celebrated throughout Christian Europe as a great victory. Church bells rang. Poems and paintings commemorated the triumph. It showed that the Ottomans could be defeated at sea. However, the strategic consequences were limited. The Ottomans rebuilt their fleet within a year. They retained control of most of the Mediterranean, and the Holy League fell apart due to internal squabbles. Venice made peace with the Ottomans in 1573, ceding Cyprus permanently. So Lepanto was a psychological blow, but not a strategic disaster. Selim died in December 1574 at the age of 50, possibly from a fall in a bathhouse while drunk. He had ruled only 8 years. His son, Murad III, succeeded him. Murad was 31 years old and would rule for 20 years. He was more capable than his father, but still less so than the great sultans of earlier generations. Murad's reign saw warfare on multiple fronts. In the east, war with Persia broke out again in 1577. This war lasted intermittently until 1590 and involved large campaigns and sieges. The Ottomans made gains in the Caucasus and eastern Anatolia. The Treaty of Constantinople in 1590 confirmed these gains. The Ottomans now controlled Georgia and parts of Azerbaijan, but the war had been costly and indecisive. In Europe, relations with the Habsburgs deteriorated into full-scale war. The Long War, as it came to be called, began in 1593 and lasted until 1606. It was fought mainly in Hungary and was a grinding, inconclusive conflict. neither side could achieve decisive advantage. Fortresses changed hands back and forth. Tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians died. The war drained both empires' resources. When it finally ended with the Treaty of Jit-Vaterok in 1606, the borders were essentially unchanged. But the war showed that the Ottomans could no longer easily expand in Europe. The balance of power was shifting. Murad's personal life was notable for his large harem. He fathered over 100 children, perhaps a record for any monarch. This created severe succession problems, as the empire now had numerous potential heirs. Murad also began the practice of keeping his adult sons confined in the palace rather than sending them to govern provinces. This cage, as it came to be called, prevented princes from gaining experience in administration and military command. It was done to prevent rebellions, but it meant that future sultans came to the throne with little preparation. Murad died in January 1595 at the age of about 51. His son Mehmed III succeeded him and immediately had his 19 brothers strangled to prevent civil war. This mass fratricide, while not unprecedented, shocked even Ottoman observers. It showed that the succession system, once brutal but effective, was becoming increasingly dysfunctional. Part 13. Stagnation and Crisis. The 17th Century. The 17th century was a time of stagnation and crisis for the Ottoman Empire. A series of weak or incompetent sultans, palace intrigues, administrative dysfunction, military setbacks, and internal rebellions all took their toll. The empire did not collapse. It remained a major power, but the trend was clearly downward. The glories of Suleiman's age seemed very distant. Mehmed III ruled from 1595 to 1603. He was the last sultan to personally lead his army into battle. At the Battle of Kereshtes in 1596, which was an Ottoman victory. But Mehmed was weak-willed and dominated by his mother and palace factions. After him came a succession of sultans who were either children, incompetent, or mentally unstable. Ahmed I ruled from 1603 to 1617. He came to the throne at age 13. He did not execute his brother Mustafa, breaking the tradition of fratricide. This was humane, but created problems. Mustafa was mentally unstable, yet he survived as a potential alternative sultan. Ahmed's reign saw continued warfare with Persia and Austria, with mixed results. Mustafa I had two brief reigns, first in 1617 to 1618, then 1622 to 1623. He was mentally incompetent and was deposed both times. His reigns were periods of palace intrigue and instability. Between his two reigns, Osman II ruled from 1618 to 1622. Osman was energetic and tried to reform the military, but he was murdered by the Janissaries who resisted his reforms. This regicide shocked the empire and showed the growing power of the Janissaries as a political force. Murad IV, who ruled from 1623 to 1640, was one of the few capable sultans of this period. He came to power as a child, but when he came of age, he asserted his authority ruthlessly. He purged the palace of corrupt officials. He executed thousands suspected of disloyalty. He banned coffee and tobacco, enforcing these bans personally by walking the streets in disguise and beheading violators. He led campaigns against Persia and recaptured Baghdad in 1638. He restored some discipline and order, but his methods were brutal, and his death at age 27 ended the brief revival. Ibrahim I, who ruled from 1640 to 1648, was mentally unstable and notorious for his debauchery. He was eventually deposed and executed. His 7-year-old son, Mehmed IV, succeeded him, beginning a reign that would last until 1687, though for much of it, real power was exercised by the Grand Viziers. The mid-17th century saw a remarkable revival under the Koprulu family of Grand Viziers. Mehmed Koprulu became Grand Vizier in 1656. He was ruthless and effective. He purged corrupt officials, restored financial order, and reorganized the army. He led campaigns that restored Ottoman authority in the provinces. His son, Fazil Ahmed Koprulu, succeeded him as Grand Vizier in 1661 and continued his policies. Under the Koprulus, the empire stabilized and even resumed expansion. In 1669, the Ottomans finally conquered Crete from Venice, ending a war that had lasted intermittently since 1645. Crete was the last major Venetian possession in the eastern Mediterranean. Its conquest marked the completion of Ottoman control over the region. In the 1670s, the Ottomans resumed expansion in Ukraine at the expense of Poland. The Ottoman vassal, the Crimean Khanate, raided deep into Polish and Russian territory, bringing back slaves and treasure. In 1683, under the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Ottomans made one last attempt to capture Vienna. A huge army, perhaps 200,000 men, besieged the city from July to September. Vienna's defenders, about 15,000 soldiers plus armed civilians, held out desperately. Just as the city was about to fall, a relief army led by the Polish king Jan Sobieski arrived. On September 12, 1683, the Battle of Vienna was fought. The Christian coalition, about 70,000 strong, routed the Ottoman army. Kara Mustafa fled. It was a catastrophic defeat. The failure at Vienna marked a turning point. Christian Europe, which had lived in fear of Ottoman expansion for 2 centuries, now saw that the Ottomans could be decisively beaten. A Holy League of Austria, Poland, Venice, and later Russia was formed. They launched coordinated attacks on Ottoman territory. The Great Turkish War, as it came to be called, lasted from 1683 to 1699 and was a disaster for the Ottomans. The Austrians reconquered Hungary, including Buda, which fell in 1686. They won a major victory at the Second Battle of Mohacs in 1687. The Venetians seized parts of Greece, including briefly Athens. The Russians conquered Azov. The Ottomans were driven back on all fronts. Internal instability added to the crisis. Mehmed IV was deposed in 1687. There were Janissary revolts, and provincial governors asserted autonomy. The war ended with the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699. The Ottomans ceded Hungary, Transylvania, and parts of Croatia to Austria. They ceded territories to Poland and Venice. Most importantly, they ceded Azov to Russia, giving Russia its first secure foothold on the Black Sea. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire had lost significant territory in a peace treaty. The age of Ottoman expansion was over. The age of Ottoman retreat had begun. Part 14. 18th Century Struggles and Reforms. The 18th century was a time of decline punctuated by attempts at reform and occasional military success. The Ottoman Empire was no longer the dynamic, expanding power it had once been. It was now on the defensive, struggling to maintain its territories against increasingly powerful European enemies. Yet it remained a major empire, controlling vast territories and millions of people. Its decline was relative, not absolute, and it would survive for another 2 centuries. The 18th century began with more warfare. The Great Northern War between Russia and Sweden created opportunities and dangers for the Ottomans. In 1711, the Ottomans intervened and managed to defeat a Russian army at the Battle of Pruth. The Russians were forced to return Azov and make other concessions. This was a rare Ottoman victory in this period and temporarily restored some prestige. But the long-term trend was unfavourable. In 1718, the Treaty of Passarowitz ended another war with Austria and Venice. The Ottomans lost more territories, including parts of Serbia and Wallachia. Each war seemed to bring new losses. The Austrians were pressing from the north, the Russians from the northeast, and the Venetians and other Mediterranean powers from the west. The Tulip period, from 1718 to 1730, was a brief era of peace and cultural flowering. Sultan Ahmed III and his Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha pursued policies of peace and cultural development. They patronized arts and architecture. They imported tulips from the Netherlands, which became a fashionable luxury. They built new palaces and gardens. They hosted lavish festivals. It was an attempt to revive Ottoman civilization through culture rather than conquest, but it was also seen by many as decadent and out of touch. In 1730, a revolt led by a Janissary named Patrona Halil forced Ahmed to abdicate. The mid-18th century saw more wars with Russia and Austria. The War of 1735 to 1739 resulted in the Treaty of Belgrade, which actually saw the Ottomans regain some lost territories. But this was temporary. The War of 1768 to 1774, fought mainly against Russia, was a disaster. The Russian fleet defeated the Ottoman fleet at Chesma in 1770. Russian armies conquered the Crimea and reached the Danube. The Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774 was humiliating. The Ottomans recognized Russian annexation of territories on the Black Sea coast. They granted Russia the right to protect Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire, which would be used to justify future Russian interventions. The Crimean Khanate, long an Ottoman vassal, became independent and would be annexed by Russia in 1783. For the first time, a Muslim power had lost control of significant Muslim populations and territories to a Christian power. These defeats prompted calls for reform. Some Ottoman officials and intellectuals recognized that the empire was falling behind Europe in military technology, administration, and economic organization. But reforms faced enormous obstacles. The Janissaries resisted any change that threatened their privileges. The religious establishment was conservative and suspicious of Western innovations. The provincial notables, who had gained autonomy, resisted central authority, and many sultans were weak or disinterested. Selim III, who ruled from 1795 to 1807, was a reforming sultan. He attempted to create a new modern army, the Nizam-i-Jadid, trained and equipped along European lines. He tried to reform the navy and the administration. He sought alliances with European powers, particularly Britain and France, to protect against Russia, but his reforms provoked resistance. In 1807, a Janissary revolt forced him to abandon his reforms. In 1808, he was deposed and later murdered. Mahmud II, who ruled from 1808 to 1839, would prove more successful in implementing reforms, but that is getting ahead of our story. The 18th century ended with the Ottoman Empire clearly in decline. It had lost territories and prestige. Its military was antiquated. Its administration was corrupt and inefficient. European powers were circling, each looking to take advantage of what was increasingly called the sick man of Europe. Yet the empire survived, showing remarkable resilience even in adversity. Part 15. The 19th Century, Reform and Disintegration. The 19th century would see the Ottoman Empire's final struggles. It would attempt major reforms to modernize and survive. It would lose most of its European territories, but cling to its core in Anatolia and the Middle East. It would become increasingly dependent on European powers, even as it resisted their encroachment, and it would ultimately be destroyed by World War I. But that end was not inevitable or even foreseeable at the century's beginning. The Ottomans would prove remarkably adaptable and resilient. Mahmud II, Sultan from 1808 to 1839, was determined to reform the empire. His greatest achievement was destroying the Janissaries. The Janissaries had become a reactionary force, blocking reforms and causing instability. In June 1826, when they revolted again, Mahmud was ready. He had loyal troops and cannons positioned. When the Janissaries gathered in the Hippodrome, Mahmud ordered his forces to fire. Thousands of Janissaries were killed. Others were hunted down over the following days and weeks. The Janissary Corps was abolished. This auspicious incident, as Mahmud called it, removed the main obstacle to military reform. Mahmud then created a new army along European lines. He imported European military advisors. He established military schools. He modernized uniforms and equipment. He also reformed the administration, creating new ministries modeled on European governments. He reformed the tax system. He established the first Ottoman newspaper. He sent students to study in Europe. He was trying to save the empire by westernizing it. But Mahmud's reign also saw significant territorial losses. The Greek War of Independence from 1821 to 1829 resulted in the creation of an independent Greek state. This was the first time a Christian people had successfully broken away from Ottoman rule. It was a major blow to Ottoman prestige and a precedent for other nationalist movements. Britain, France, and Russia had intervened to support Greek independence, showing Ottoman inability to resist European pressure. In 1830 to 1831, and again in 1839 to 1840, Mahmud fought wars against his own vassal, Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt. Muhammad Ali had modernized Egypt and created a powerful army. He sought independence or even to replace Mahmud as sultan. Egyptian forces defeated Ottoman armies and threatened Istanbul. Only European intervention, particularly British pressure, saved the Ottoman Empire. Muhammad Ali was forced to back down, but Egypt remained effectively autonomous. The empire's inability to defeat its own vassal showed its weakness. Abdul-Majid I, Sultan from 1839 to 1861, continued reforms. The Tanzimat, or reorganization, was a series of reforms aimed at modernizing the empire. Announced in 1839, the Tanzimat reforms included guarantees of life and property for all subjects regardless of religion, equality before the law, a modern system of taxation, and a reformed judicial system. These were revolutionary changes aimed at creating a modern state based on citizenship rather than religious community. The Tanzimat reforms had mixed success. They created a more modern bureaucracy and legal system. They improved the status of non-Muslim minorities who were given greater equality. They promoted education and infrastructure development. Railways began to be built. Telegraph lines connected the empire. New schools and universities were established, but the reforms also created resistance. Muslim conservatives resented the equality granted to non-Muslims. The old elites resented the loss of their privileges, and implementation was uneven and often corrupt. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856 was the major international event of mid-century. Russia attacked the Ottoman Empire, hoping to gain control of the Balkans and the Straits. Britain and France, fearing Russian expansion, allied with the Ottomans. The war was fought mainly in the Crimea. After 3 years of brutal fighting, Russia was defeated. The Treaty of Paris in 1856 maintained Ottoman territorial integrity and admitted the Ottoman Empire to the Concert of Europe, the group of great powers that managed international relations. This seemed like a success, but it also showed Ottoman dependence on European support. The 1860s and 70s saw accelerating nationalism in the Balkans. Serbia, Romania, and Montenegro gained autonomy or independence. In 1876, revolts broke out in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Bulgaria. The Ottoman response to the Bulgarian uprising was brutal, and reports of massacres shocked European opinion. Russia declared war in 1877, claiming to protect Christians under Ottoman rule. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878 was a disaster for the Ottomans. Russian armies advanced to the outskirts of Istanbul. The Ottomans were forced to sign the Treaty of San Stefano, which would have created a large Bulgarian state under Russian influence and ceded significant territories. European powers, particularly Britain, intervened. At the Congress of Berlin in 1878, the treaty was revised. The Ottomans still lost significant territories. Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro became fully independent. Bosnia and Herzegovina came under Austrian occupation. Russia gained territories in the Caucasus. Britain occupied Cyprus. The Ottoman Empire in Europe was reduced to a small territory around Istanbul and Albania. Abdul Hamid II, Sultan from 1876 to 1909, was the last sultan to hold real power. He came to the throne during the crisis of 1877 to 1878. He initially supported constitutionalism and in 1876 promulgated the first Ottoman constitution, creating a parliament. But in 1878, after the disastrous war, he suspended the constitution and dissolved parliament. For the next 30 years, he ruled as an absolute monarch. Abdul Hamid was intelligent, paranoid, and reactionary. He emphasized Islamic unity and claimed the title of Caliph to rally Muslim support. He built railways and telegraph lines to improve communication and control. He established a vast spy network to monitor threats to his rule. He promoted conservative Islam as a counterweight to nationalism and westernization. He resisted further European encroachment when possible, but made concessions when necessary. Under Abdul Hamid, the Ottoman Empire became known as the sick man of Europe. European powers assumed it would soon collapse and positioned themselves to grab pieces. But Abdul Hamid's regime proved more durable than expected. The empire lost more territories. Britain occupied Egypt in 1882. France occupied Tunisia in 1881. Italy would invade Libya in 1911. But the core of the empire in Anatolia and the Arab Middle East remained intact. In 1908, a revolution by the Young Turks, a group of military officers and intellectuals, forced Abdul Hamid to restore the constitution and parliament. In 1909, after he attempted a counter-coup, he was deposed. The Young Turks took control of the government. They were modernizers and nationalists who wanted to save the empire through radical reform, but their time in power would be brief and would end in catastrophe. Part 16. The Final Years and the Great War. The period from 1908 to 1922 was the Ottoman Empire's final act. It was a time of revolution, war, genocide, and collapse. The empire, that had endured for 6 centuries, would finally disintegrate, leaving in its place the modern Turkish Republic and a transformed Middle East. The speed of the collapse was stunning, even to those who had predicted the empire's demise. The Young Turks, or the Committee of Union and Progress, took control after the revolution of 1908. They were a diverse group, united mainly by their desire to modernize and strengthen the empire. They promoted Turkish nationalism, which alienated non-Turkish populations. They promoted secularization, which angered religious conservatives. They were often arbitrary and authoritarian in their methods, but they were energetic and determined. The empire immediately faced crises. Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908, territories it had only occupied. Bulgaria declared full independence the same year. Crete united with Greece. In 1911, Italy invaded Libya, one of the empire's last African possessions. The Italians were victorious, and Libya was lost in 1912. Then came the Balkan Wars. In 1912, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro formed an alliance and attacked the Ottoman Empire. They aimed to divide up the remaining Ottoman territories in Europe. The First Balkan War was a disaster for the Ottomans. The Balkan allies won victory after victory. Adrianople fell. The Ottoman army was driven back to the outskirts of Istanbul. The Treaty of London in May 1913 reduced Ottoman Europe to just Istanbul and a small hinterland. Nearly all of Macedonia and Thrace were lost. The Second Balkan War in summer 1913, fought mainly between the Balkan allies over the spoils, allowed the Ottomans to recapture Adrianople, but this was small consolation. Centuries of Ottoman rule in the Balkans were over. The empire had lost territories it had controlled for 400 or 500 years. the psychological impact was enormous. In 1914, World War I began. The Ottoman Empire, under the influence of Enver Pasha, one of the leading Young Turks, allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary. This was a fateful decision. Some officials argued for neutrality, but the Young Turk leadership saw an opportunity to regain lost territories and restore the empire's power. They entered the war in November 1914. The Ottoman Empire fought on multiple fronts. In the Caucasus, they fought Russia. Enver Pasha led a disastrous winter campaign that ended in catastrophe at the Battle of Sarikamis in December 1914 to January 1915. Ottoman forces were destroyed by Russian arms and the harsh winter. Perhaps 70 or 80,000 Ottoman soldiers died. In April 1915, British and French forces landed at Gallipoli, attempting to seize the straits and knock the Ottomans out of the war. The Gallipoli campaign lasted until January 1916 and was a bloody stalemate. The Ottomans, under the command of officers including Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, successfully defended the peninsula. The Allies eventually withdrew. It was an Ottoman victory, but a costly one. During the war, the Ottoman government committed genocide against the Armenian population. Armenians had long been suspected of sympathy with Russia. In 1915, the government ordered the deportation of Armenians from eastern Anatolia to the Syrian desert. This deportation was carried out with extreme brutality. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians were killed outright. Perhaps 1 million or more died from starvation, disease, and exposure during the deportations. The Armenian genocide remains a deeply controversial and painful topic. The Turkish government has long denied it was genocide, but the historical evidence is overwhelming that the Ottoman government deliberately sought to destroy the Armenian population. In the Arab provinces, Ottoman rule began to unravel. Arab nationalists, encouraged and supported by Britain, rebelled. The Arab revolt, led by Sharif Hussein of Mecca and his sons, with British officer T.E. Lawrence playing a supporting role, began in 1916. Arab forces, with British support, gradually pushed the Ottomans out of the Hejaz and moved northward towards Syria. Meanwhile, British forces advanced from Egypt into Palestine and Mesopotamia. In October 1917, General Allenby's British forces captured Jerusalem. In September 1918, they captured Damascus. Ottoman armies were defeated or in retreat on all fronts. In October 1918, British forces captured Aleppo. The empire's Arab provinces were lost. In the east, Russian collapse in 1917 had briefly allowed Ottoman expansion into the Caucasus, but this proved temporary. On October 30th, 1918, the Ottoman Empire signed the Armistice of Mudros, ending its participation in World War I. Ottoman forces were to be demobilized. Allied forces would occupy strategic points. The straits would be opened to Allied ships. In effect, the empire had surrendered unconditionally. The Young Turk leadership fled the country. Sultan Mehmed VI, who had come to the throne in July 1918, was left to deal with the disaster. Allied forces occupied Istanbul. British, French and Italian forces occupied various parts of Anatolia and the Arab lands. Greece, with Allied support, landed forces at Smyrna and began occupying western Anatolia. The empire appeared finished. But one man refused to accept defeat. Mustafa Kemal, the hero of Gallipoli, landed at Samsun in May 1919 to organise resistance. He gathered supporters, established a provisional government in Ankara, and began to organise a Turkish nationalist movement. The Turkish War of Independence had begun. Part 17. The End of Empire and the Birth of Turkey. The final collapse of the Ottoman Empire was intertwined with the Turkish War of Independence. As the empire's institutions disintegrated and its territory was occupied, a new nationalist movement arose, determined to save at least the Turkish heartland of Anatolia. This movement, led by Mustafa Kemal, would ultimately create a new Turkish nation-state from the ruins of the empire, but it would take years of warfare and enormous suffering. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in August 1920, was supposed to formalize the empire's dismemberment. Under its terms, the Ottomans would lose all Arab territories, which would be divided between British and French mandates. Eastern Anatolia would become an independent Armenia. A Kurdish state might be created. Greece would control Western Anatolia. Italy and France would control parts of southern Anatolia. Istanbul and the Straits would be under international control. The Ottoman state would be reduced to a small Turkish rump in central Anatolia. It was a harsh treaty designed to eliminate the Ottoman Empire as a significant power. But the Treaty of Sèvres was never implemented. The Turkish nationalists, led by Mustafa Kemal from Ankara, rejected it utterly. They organized an army from demobilized Ottoman soldiers and local militias. They received support from Soviet Russia, which hoped to weaken Britain and France. In 1920, the Turkish nationalists defeated Armenian forces in the east, establishing control over eastern Anatolia. They then turned west against the Greeks. The Greco-Turkish War of 1919 to 1922 was brutal. Greek forces advanced deep into Anatolia, reaching within miles of Ankara. But their supply lines were overextended, and they faced a hostile population. In August 1922, Mustafa Kemal launched a counter-offensive. At the Battle of Dumlupinar, the Greek army was routed. The Greeks retreated in chaos. The Turkish army pursued them to the coast. In September 1922, Turkish forces entered Smyrna. The city burned, and much of its Greek and Armenian population fled or was killed. It was a catastrophe for the Greeks, but a triumph for the Turkish nationalists. With the Greeks defeated, the other occupying powers withdrew. France and Italy made peace. Only the British remained in Istanbul and the Straits, but they too eventually agreed to negotiate. In July 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed. This treaty replaced Sèvres. It recognized a Turkish state controlling all of Anatolia and eastern Thrace, including Istanbul. The Straits would be demilitarized, but under Turkish sovereignty. There would be no Armenian state and no Kurdish state. Population exchanges would move Greeks out of Turkey and Turks out of Greece, creating ethnically homogeneous states. On October 29, 1923, Mustafa Kemal declared the Republic of Turkey with Ankara as its capital. He became its first president. The Ottoman Sultanate had already been abolished in November 1922. Sultan Mehmed VI had fled on a British warship. In March 1924, the Ottoman Caliphate was also abolished. The last caliph, Abdul Majid II, was sent into exile. the Ottoman Empire was officially finished. After 600 years, the House of Osman no longer ruled. The empire that had stretched from Budapest to Baghdad, from Algiers to Armenia, was gone. What remained was Turkey, a nation-state built on the ruins of empire. Mustafa Kemal, who took the surname Ataturk, meaning father of the Turks, would transform Turkey into a secular, Western-oriented republic. He abolished the Islamic Caliphate and religious courts. He introduced Western law codes. He granted women the right to vote. He replaced the Arabic script with the Latin alphabet. He promoted Turkish nationalism and discouraged minority identities. His reforms were radical and often authoritarian, but they created modern Turkey. The Arab lands that had been Ottoman provinces became League of Nations mandates under British and French control. Syria and Lebanon went to France. Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine went to Britain. These mandates were supposed to prepare the territories for independence, but in practice they were colonial rule by another name. The modern borders of the Middle East were drawn by European diplomats in conferences in Paris and London, often with little regard for ethnic, religious, or tribal realities. These artificial borders and the resentments they created would cause conflict for the next century. The Balkans, freed from Ottoman rule, descended into nationalism, ethnic conflict, and political instability. The various nations created from Ottoman territories fought with each other over borders and minorities. World War II would devastate the region, and then the Cold War would divide it. The transition from empire to nation-states was violent and traumatic. The end of the Ottoman Empire was the end of an era. For 6 centuries, it had been one of the world's great powers. It had been multi-ethnic and multi-religious, ruling over diverse populations from the Balkans to the Middle East. Its fall led to the creation of over 30 new nation-states and fundamentally reshaped the political map of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. The consequences of its collapse are still felt today in ongoing conflicts and political tensions in the region. And so we come to the end of our journey through 6 centuries of Ottoman history. From Osman's small beylik in the hills of Anatolia, to Suleiman's vast empire to the republic created by Ataturk from the empire's ruins, it is a story of rise, triumph, decline, and fall. It is a story of conquest and culture, of power and poetry, of innovation and stagnation. It is, above all, a human story, shaped by the decisions of sultans and soldiers, administrators, and ordinary people. The Ottoman Empire left a complex legacy. It brought centuries of relative peace and order to diverse regions. It preserved and transmitted classical learning. It created a distinctive culture that blended Turkish, Persian, and Arab elements. Its architecture, from the Suleymaniye Mosque to the countless other buildings throughout its former territories, still inspires awe. Its administrative and military systems influenced many other states. But the empire also left a legacy of unresolved conflicts. The nationalist movements it suppressed eventually tore it apart. The ethnic and religious tensions it managed, but never resolved, continue in many of its former territories. The arbitrary borders drawn after its fall created artificial states that struggle with legitimacy and stability. The Armenian genocide remains an unhealed wound. The treatment of minorities, while relatively tolerant for its time, left many bitter memories. Understanding the Ottoman Empire is essential for understanding the modern Middle East, the Balkans, and even Europe. The empire shaped these regions profoundly. Its rise and fall mark major turning points in world history. The transition from medieval to modern, from empire to nation-state, from religious to secular governance, all these transitions can be traced through Ottoman history. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you can imagine the sweep of these 6 centuries, the warriors on horseback in Anatolian hills, the great siege guns battering Constantinople's walls, the Ottoman fleet dominating the Mediterranean, the splendor of Suleiman's court, the slow erosion of power and prestige, the final desperate struggle and defeat, the rise of something new from the ruins. History is not just dates and battles. It is the story of how we got from then to now, from there to here. And the Ottoman story is part of all our stories, even if we never lived under Ottoman rule. Because history connects us all across time and space in ways we often don't recognize, but which shape our world nonetheless. The Ottoman Empire is gone, but its echoes remain in the borders of nations, in the names of cities, in the architecture that still stands, in the languages people speak, in the conflicts that still simmer, and in the memories, both fond and bitter, that different peoples carry about those 6 centuries of Ottoman rule. History is not past, it is present. And understanding it, as we have tried to do tonight, helps us understand the world we live in now. And with that thought, we come to the end of Sleepless History's journey through the Ottoman Empire. 6 centuries compressed into a few hours. Of course, there is much more that could be said. Every sultan, every battle, every reform could be explored in far greater depth, but we have touched on the major themes and turning points. We have traced the arc from rise to fall. We have seen how a small frontier principality became a world empire and how that empire eventually came apart. We have witnessed human ambition, courage, cruelty, wisdom, and folly across 600 years. And now, the story complete, it is time to rest. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. May your dreams be peaceful and your sleep deep. Good night